So there was a little disagreement early on about how much we should work and how hard we should work.
When Don Felder was unceremoniously dismissed from the Eagles in 2000, it was one of rock and roll's most dramatic exits, not just because of the sudden nature of his departure, but also because of the significant emotional and professional cost it incurred. The Eagles had already become one of the most successful bands in history by the time Felder left, and his departure would go on to spark a series of legal battles and public feuds that would continue for years. However, the story behind his exit from the Eagles is far more complex than it might first seem. Don Felder is often most remembered for his instrumental contributions to some of the band's most iconic songs, including Hotel California. His guitar work on that track became legendary, and his role in shaping the band's sound is undeniable. But the truth behind his leaving the band is a story of tension, power struggles, and a growing dissatisfaction that ultimately forced him to part ways with the Eagles. Felder joined the Eagles in 1974, just as the band was reaching the height of its early fame. The band, led by Glenn Frey and Don Henley, had already begun to create a sound that was both deeply rooted in country rock and ahead of its time. Felder was brought in to add more depth and texture to the Eagles' sound, and his guitar playing immediately became a key part of the band's sonic identity. Alongside Joe Walsh, Felder brought a hard-edged rock influence that helped elevate the band's music to new heights. At the beginning of Felder's tenure, things seemed promising. He was working with like-minded musicians and contributing to hits like One of These Nights, Witchy Woman, and of course, Hotel California. It appeared as though the band was headed for even greater success, but as time went on, the cracks in the band's unity started to show. One of the earliest and most persistent sources of tension in the Eagles was the balance of creative power between the members. Glenn Frey and Don Henley, as the main songwriters and vocalists, held the reins of the band. While Felder was a talented musician and songwriter in his own right, his contributions were often overshadowed by Frey and Henley's dominant presence within the band. In his memoir, Heaven and Hell, My Life in the Eagles, Felder recounts how his role became more limited over time, with him being sidelined when it came to decision-making about the band's direction and finances. In interviews, Felder has explained that while he was initially brought in as an equal member of the Eagles, as time went on, it became increasingly clear that Frey and Henley had more control over the band's decisions. Felder, being the type of musician who valued his creative freedom, grew frustrated with the lack of autonomy he was afforded. The other members of the Eagles, particularly Frey and Henley, had a clear vision for the band's success, but Felder felt as though his input was being systematically dismissed. The sense of being pushed aside only grew as the band's success continued to skyrocket, and Felder began to feel like an outsider in a band he had helped shape.
Well, with so much time to reflect on it, is after all quite a long time ago. Do you say to yourself, might have, could have, should have done it a different way?
You know, I don't have any regrets about the way I felt about it at the time. I think that's a mistake to look back and regret your own decisions, you know. A band like U2, they have been high school buddies. They share equally in everything. They go on vacations together. Their families and kids and friends, there's like a camaraderie there.
This growing frustration was compounded by the fact that Felder had contributed significantly to some of the band's biggest hits, including the music for Hotel California. Despite this, Felder felt as though he wasn't receiving the credit or recognition he deserved. At times, he even joked that Hotel California was his greatest accomplishment and his greatest frustration, as it became the symbol of his contributions to the band, but also a reminder of the tensions that simmered underneath the surface. The breaking point came in 2000 when Felder was presented with a new contract. According to Felder, the new deal significantly reduced his stake in the band and gave Frey and Henley even more control. The contract, which Felder described as unfair, would essentially leave him with little to no creative input. It was an ultimatum: sign the contract or leave the band. The final blow came when Felder was told that his guitar playing was no longer needed on some of the band's biggest tracks. For Felder, this was a direct insult, as it meant that his contributions to the band were being minimized in favor of maintaining Frey and Henley's grip on the band's identity. When Felder refused to sign the new contract, he was fired from the band. The news of his dismissal shocked fans and the music world alike, as it marked the end of an era for the Eagles. The band had been known for its tight-knit camaraderie, but Felder's departure revealed the cracks that had formed in their relationships over the years. In a statement, Felder expressed his dismay at the way things had ended ended, claiming that his firing was both a betrayal and a violation of the trust he had placed in Frey and Henley. He later sued the Eagles for breach of contract, seeking compensation for the royalties he felt he was owed.
That seemed to have dissolved and gone away between that time when the Eagles first broke up and when the Hell Freezes Over reunion took place. All of that had changed, and probably a lot of it was because of Don Henley's solo career, and Glenn Frey had a good solo career in those years as well, so they felt they were more entitled to a lion's share. But I don't regret my decisions from the time.
The legal battle dragged on for years, further cementing the acrimonious split between Felder and his former bandmates. After leaving the Eagles, Felder found himself at a crossroads. While the Eagles had been his life for nearly 3 decades, he was now free to pursue his own musical path. In the years following his departure, Felder released solo albums, including Road to Forever, which featured his signature guitar work and songwriting. He also spent time touring and playing live shows, including performances of Eagles classics like Hotel California and Take It Easy. For Felder, life after the Eagles was about rediscovering his passion for music and finding new creative outlets. He had always loved performing, but now, as a solo artist, he had the freedom to experiment and take his music in new directions. In interviews, Felder has spoken about how liberating it was to be able to write and record music without the constraints that had been placed on him during his time with the Eagles. However, despite finding success on his own, Felder has admitted that the process of leaving the Eagles and the subsequent fallout took a toll on him. The emotional and financial impact of the legal battles weighed heavily on him, but Felder remains proud of his legacy with the band. In fact, he views his time with the Eagles as a crucial chapter in his life, even if it ended on a bitter note. Over time, there have been attempts at reconciliation between Felder and his former bandmates. While Henley and Frey have remained silent on the issue for the most part, Felder has expressed a willingness to patch things up. He has acknowledged the immense success they shared as a band, but also stated that he feels like he was wronged in the process. In his interviews, Felder has stressed that he doesn't harbor animosity toward Henley or Frey, but rather feels that their business decisions left him with little choice but to leave. However, the relationship between Felder and the Eagles has never fully healed. Despite his willingness to move on, Felder has made it clear that he will never be able to truly reconcile with the band until the issues surrounding his departure are addressed. For now, he remains a successful solo artist, but he knows that his legacy will always be linked to the Eagles. Felder's departure from the Eagles is one of the most dramatic and high-profile splits in rock history, but it hasn't overshadowed the incredible music they created together. In interviews, Felder has consistently expressed pride in the work he did with the Eagles, even as he looks back on the struggles he faced within the band. His contributions to the band's sound, particularly his iconic guitar work on songs like Hotel California, remain some of the most enduring moments in rock history. As for his future, Felder continues to tour and record music, sharing his love for playing and performing with his fans. He may have left the Eagles, but his music and influence remain an integral part of the band's legacy. In the end, Felder's story is a reminder of the complexities of fame, creativity, and the sacrifices that musicians make in pursuit of their art. While he may not have stayed with the Eagles, Don Felder's musical journey is far from over, and he's far from finished making his mark on rock music. We'd love to hear your thoughts about this. Let us know in the comment sections and see you on the next one.